Think twice before accepting the pale man's offer.
When I first met the pale man, he wore a suit of deepest black. There wasn't a speck on it, not even a fleck of dirt from the muddy road he must have walked to reach my father's pub. He stood out from our regular clientele, who struggled to go an evening without smearing gravy-stained fingers on their trousers or slopping beer down their shirts. As I watched him effortlessly navigate his way across the packed room, and take a seat at the single empty table, my heart clenched. Asterisk, I'd kill for a suit like that, asterisk, I thought. A suit that fit me perfectly. A suit made by a tailor instead of my mother cannibalizing the clothes my brother had long since outgrown. A suit that would make people pay attention when I walked into the room. As if I had spoken the words aloud, he locked eyes with me and smiled. Later, he would tell me that I might as well have whispered my desperation into his ear. He hadn't read my mind, not exactly. I could smell it from across the room, he said. The reek of your hunger. But that secret wouldn't be revealed to me for many years. During the first few minutes of our acquaintance, I was thrilled by his sudden, unexpected attention. When he beckoned me to his table, I all but tripped over my own feet. In my haste to reach him up close, he was breathtaking. Auburn hair fell in heavy curls onto his shoulders, and his pale skin was almost pearl scent. His eyes, nearly as dark as his suit, seemed to laugh. As I took the only other seat at the table, his smile grew wider. Through his parted lips, I saw that his teeth were stained black. It was not the usual decay that afflicted some of our neighbors, it looked as though he had tried to take a bite out of the night itself. I glanced away quickly, feeling ashamed somehow, as though I had peered through a keyhole and glimpsed something I shouldn't. When I looked back again, I saw his teeth were straight and white. Relieved, eager, I dismissed it as a trick of the shadows. You like this? He motioned towards his suit. I nodded, and he asked, would you like one of your own? The laughter bubbled out of me before I could stop it. It matters little what I want, I've as much chance of affording one as a cat's in hell without claws. He tooted lightly. A rather constrained attitude. In life, half the battle is deciding what you want. So tell me, Peter, he propped his delicately pointed chin atop his laced fingers, what do you want? Had I paused to question how he knew my name, I would have rationalized that he had heard one of our patrons summoning me back to the bar, demanding a fresh pint of beer. But I didn't question. The pale man was too fantastical a sight, too rich for our humble village, too important to talk with the likes of me. I feared that, should I allow my attention to wander, he would evaporate before my eyes. So I answered his question. Of course I wanted the suit. More than that, I wanted one for every day of the week. Every confession after that first one came easier. Most people born into our village lived their entire unremarkable lives there. They were christened, married and laid to rest within the small boundaries of the same church and its yard. The thought of following that fate made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to escape, to travel dusty roads and churning seas, to see anywhere other than here. And I wanted to do it comfortably, luxuriously, even. My entire life, I had watched my parents hoard each coin. Usually, it stretched just far enough, but in leaner times they agonized over how it should be spent. One winter, my mother skipped so many meals that she scarcely had the energy to rise out of bed. I wanted respect. And my own small stock of fame, a name associated with something other than pouring drinks in a dingy pub. Mostly, I wanted to be seen. All of this burst out of me in a rush. I didn't care that I might be overheard, and that if my father caught wind of it, he would try to knock such notions out of my head with a sharp clap around the ear. Only two things seemed important, bearing my soul to the pale man, and keeping my eyes on the table while I did it. At the corner of my vision, I could see his smile growing wider and wider, and a voice in my head I refused to acknowledge even as I obeyed it warned me that should I look, I would see those black fangs again. When at last I fell silent, the pale man said, "Excellent, Peter. See, you're already halfway there. You know what you want, now you must decide what you're willing to do to get it." For that, I had no response. Dreams were all well and good, but I lived in reality. For a young man of humble origins, the best hope was to strike out for the nearest town and try to forge a life there. But there would be no suits in that future, no ships nor accolades, perhaps not even anything resembling comfort. The pale man leaned in close, whispering conspiratorially into my ear. "What if I told you I could give all that to you? A long life filled with anything you could desire. And not in some dim, distant future, but right now, you could walk out the door and step into a new life." I should have laughed, or accused him of mocking me. Instead I had an image of a serpent and an apple, and what our rector might say if he could hear this conversation. Deep laughter rumbled in his chest. You give me entirely too much credit. I'm not him. I'm merely a talented individual in a position to offer you an excellent deal. I risked a glance at him. His teeth were thankfully still white, but his eyes had grown sharp, hungry. I wondered whether that expression was mirrored on my own face. And what would my end be? Once a year, you will need to complete an errand for me. He waved an airy hand. Nothing outside of your capabilities, of course, and you will be able to discharge your duties in a single day. The other 364 days belong to you entirely. In my entire life, I hadn't owned a single day. They belonged to my parents, my brother, and as soon as I was as tall as the tables, the pub's patrons. Sacrificing one day a year seemed like an excellent bargain. The pale man supplied. I quite agree. If you wish to accept, we need only drink on it. No, wait. He plunged a hand into one of his pristine pockets and withdrew a fat, gleaming apple and a silver paring knife. Dropping me an exaggerated wink, he said, we all must have our little jokes, Peter. When he sliced into the apple, I had a sudden suspicion that the flesh inside would be rotten and worm-riddled. But it was as crisp and juicy an apple as I had ever seen, the aroma strong enough to make my mouth water. He cut off 2 slices and held one out to me across the table. As I reached for it, he pulled it just out of my grasp. One more thing, you cannot exit our deal prematurely. We're entering a contract, of sorts, and it must run for its full term. Is that acceptable to you? I plucked the slice from his hand and crammed it into my mouth. Grinning, he did the same. Go then, Peter, he said once he had swallowed, motioning towards the door. Enjoy your new life. Standing up so quickly my chair clattered to the floor, I strode to the door and yanked it open. Just before I stepped over the threshold, a voice whispered in my mind, see you in a year. As I set out down the road, with nothing more than the clothes on my back, I had no doubts. A single, irresistible urge dominated me, head south. After a mile of following my new compass, I found a young woman stranded by the roadside. She gratefully accepted my offer to escort her to the next village, some 3 miles further. The walk gave us time to get acquainted. I learnt that she was wealthy and well-connected. She learnt that I was charming and funny, although that was as much a discovery for me as it was for her. The next week, in the city, I was fitted for my first suit, a gift from the grateful young woman. The next month, we were married with the blessings of her parents, who were surprisingly willing to allow their daughter to marry a poor man of no name. As a wedding present, they funded a 6-month tour of the continent. We wandered at ancient ruins and paintings so exquisite they near moved me to tears, slept in sheets softer than anything I could have imagined, and dined with the wealthy friends of her wealthy parents. They also had friends at home, as I discovered when we returned. Everyone was so eager to help me find a path in life, something on which I could build my name. By the end of that first year, I had a devoted, newly pregnant wife, a grand home in the city, and I was in the exciting, early stages of building my reputation. I had all but convinced myself I had imagined the pale man, dreamed him up as a way of explaining my incredible good fortune. But precisely 1 year after our first meeting, I woke suddenly in our warm marriage bed with the certainty that I was being watched. Unwillingly, I rose and went to the window. When I cracked the curtains, I saw the pale man standing with his hand on our gate, wearing his familiar smile. I wish I could tell you what that first errand was. It appalls me that I can't, but you must understand, I spend the rest of the year trying to forget the one day that belongs to him, and those days he does own have blurred together over time. Sometimes, the task is simple, like delivering a message. A letter will appear on my doorstep, addressed in thick, clotted blood, and I must deliver it to the addressee. The first time I acted as courier, I handed the letter over personally. Since then, I have deposited them on doorsteps and beaten a quick retreat. The cold terror in that first recipient's eyes, the tremble in her hand as she accepted the letter, will never leave me. I have stolen objects of great value and hidden them in the rooms of innocent men and women before anonymously notifying the police. I have forged documents and watched the ensuing chaos unfold in the drawing rooms of the wealthy and powerful. Some of the worst assignments have put me into contact with twisted beings, human, yet more alike in nature to the pale man. I assisted a silent, hulking man with burying the remnants of what had once been a person. On another occasion, I led an excitable, ferret-looking creature to 3 different houses. The next day, I read in the newspaper that they had each been set ablaze in the night. Someone had barred the doors. There were no survivors. On the 25th anniversary of our deal, the pale man appeared at my dining room table, having conjured a feast seemingly out of thin air. For course after sumptuous course, he spoke of my exploits and achievements over the years, making comments and assessments, expecting me to venture nothing in return. The last course was mine alone. He gave a deep bow as he placed it before me, then removed the cloche with a flourish. Before me lay a steaming heart. It's human, that was my one thought before he handed me a knife and fork, and I had to shut out all reason. 2 hours it took me. 2 hours of sawing through the thick muscle, chewing, choking back my gorge. By the time I forced down the last morsel, I was weeping. He handed me a chunk of bread to sop up the pool of blood from the plate. As he buttoned his coat and made to leave, I asked, why? It was the only question I had dared ask since we sat at the small table in my father's pub. He smiled slowly, and for the first time since that day, I saw the black seeping into his teeth. I've told you before, Peter, we all must have our little jokes. The worst of it, though, was when he required nothing more of me than to listen. 5 times he has appeared, precisely at midnight, at the foot of my bed. These are the only occasions during which he has offered me real honesty, including a glimpse of his true form. His teeth were black, yes, but that inky darkness extended over the rest of his body, pulsing through the veins beneath his near translucent skin and extending around him like a cloak. And the stench emanating from him, as rotten as I suspected the apple he once offered me would be. Each time, he pulled a chair up to my bed and began to talk. He told me of deals he had made with other unfortunate souls, deals that were not so generous as the one he offered me. He told me of their gruesome ends, usually long after they had been driven out of their wits. He told me of where their souls were languishing now. I knew you were better than that, Peter. He said it each time. Softly. Almost affectionately. I could smell it from across the room. The reek of your hunger. Your potential. He spoke of his own past, in a time when men and gods walked closely together, and the person he had been before he became the pale man out. Of everything, through all the years, this has come closest to driving me to madness, for I fear it is a glimpse into my own future. It has become my daily practice to examine myself in the mirror. I pray for a gray line or a wrinkle. You see, I first met the pale man in 1812, yet I look no older than the day I left my father's pub. No one, not my family, nor the esteemed colleagues of my many ventures, has questioned my seemingly eternal youth. Part of the pale man's sorcery, I presume. To ensure the continuation of our bargain. In my long years, while I remained ageless, I watched first my wife go into the ground, then our children, then their children, until finally I could bear it no longer and cut myself adrift from them. The pale man spoke truly when he said I could not exit the contract prematurely. I first tried on the night I left my family. I have tried many times since by rope, by knife, and by poison, and always I awake, unharmed, at least in body, in my bed. Recently, I have noticed a change. Not the signs of aging that I have awaited for many decades, but something else, a certain blackening around the edges of my teeth. When it first began, I only saw it for a second or two. I would blink, and when I next looked into the mirror they would be pristine and white again. But the closer I get to the pale man's next visit, the longer the blackness lasts during my daily inspections. It's getting harder to dismiss it as a trick of the shadows. There is something more. I've begun to smell it, the hunger he spoke of. Hunger for wealth and power, for security and belonging, for an ounce of comfort. I smell it everywhere I go. Dining at a restaurant. Being fitted for a new suit at my tailor's. Through a computer screen. When I catch a particularly strong scent, it takes every ounce of my will not to follow it, to trace it to its source and see what they might do to sate their hunger. I have managed to resist the urge so far, but every time the blackness creeps a little further into my mouth, it gets harder. A little voice, I'm unsure whether it's the pale man or my own instinct, whispers that taking their hunger and making it my own might be the only thing to make this existence tolerable. So I'm writing this now, while there is still enough of me left to want to warn you. If you're approached by a man with an irresistible offer, think twice before accepting it. It might be my pale man. Or it might be a man once known as Peter.